I was grabbing coffee with a colleague last week, the kind of guy who prides himself on being well-informed. He was scrolling through a thread about state-controlled media in Pyongyang, shaking his head with a mix of pity and condescension. Imagine living in a world where you're told what to think every single day, he said, tapping his phone screen. Thank God we actually have a choice. He felt completely insulated. To him, propaganda was something that happened in grainy gray footage from overseas, not something that arrived in 4K resolution on his iPhone. He started ranting about how those people are trapped in a bubble of lies. But then I asked him a simple question. Why is it that when the news talks about Iran, they call it a regime, but when they talk about Saudi Arabia, it's always a government? The look on his face shifted instantly. It wasn't anger, it was a total blank. He paused, looked at his newsfeed, and tried to find a logical explanation, but he couldn't. He'd never even noticed the switch. A minute later, the conversation drifted to the war in Ukraine, and he started laughing about a story he'd read. Something about Russian soldiers being reduced to fighting with literal rusty shovels because they'd run out of ammunition. He was giddy, convinced the entire system was hours away from a total collapse. When I mentioned that the latest IMF data actually showed their economy growing faster than Germany's or the UK's, he didn't ask for the source. He just got defensive. He accused me of falling for the narrative. That's when it hit me. The most effective form of control isn't the one that locks you in a room and screams at you. It's the one that makes you feel like the smartest person in the room for repeating exactly what you were told to say. The most dangerous lie we tell ourselves is that we're the only ones who aren't being lied to.
That silence you describe, that total blank look on your colleague's face, that is the exact moment.
The moment what?
The moment the illusion of immunity just cracks. It's a fascinating psychological mechanism, really. If you go to, say, London or Paris or Washington and you tell the average person they live under state propaganda, they will literally laugh in your face.
Absolutely. They'll point somewhere else.
They'll point to Moscow or Tehran and say, no, that happens over there. We have a free press. We have the internet. We can say what we want.
It's the "it can't happen here" syndrome.
Yeah.
We think propaganda has a certain look, a certain aesthetic. Marching bands, red flags, dictators shouting from a balcony. It doesn't look like a sleek app on your phone or a late-night comedy host or a summer blockbuster.
And that is the entire trick. The most sophisticated propaganda, the most effective kind, markets itself as freedom. We're not dealing with a dictator shouting. We're dealing with a multi-billion-dollar ecosystem.
Of what? Celebrities? News anchors?
Entertainment. It shapes consensus so quietly that people mistake it for their own original thinking. When everyone you follow, everyone you watch, everyone you respect repeats the same talking point.
You don't feel coerced.
No, you feel like you've reached a logical consensus.
So, okay, if we're swimming in this water, we need to understand what's in it. And based on everything I've been reading for this deep dive, the first layer isn't even about fake facts. It's deeper than that. It's linguistic.
It's the words. Language shapes your reality before a single fact is even presented. It creates a moral hierarchy in your brain before you even know it's happening.
So your example of regime versus government.
Yeah, it sounds like a simple synonym.
Yeah.
Just a stylistic choice from a journalist.
Not. I started looking for this everywhere after that coffee meeting. Iran? Regime? Syria? Regime.
And then Saudi Arabia?
Government. Real. Government.
It's a moral filter. Regime implies illegitimacy. It suggests something sinister, something temporary, something that needs to be, toppled.
Right. It's prejudged.
Whereas government implies legitimacy. It implies nuance, structure, a state you can do diplomacy with. So now, regardless of the internal policies of these places, which might look quite similar on paper, the word choice tells you who to root for.
It creates a good guy and a bad guy before the story even begins. And I notice it goes way beyond just country names. Happens with conflict terminology, too.
Absolutely. Look at how soldiers are described. One side has fighters or soldiers. They have terrorists or militants. Or look at geographic erasure. This is a huge one in Middle East coverage. When Western media covers the region, certain words just vanish.
What?
Occupied East Jerusalem becomes just Jerusalem. Occupied West Bank becomes the West Bank.
The word occupy just disappears.
It's gone. And with it, the entire legal and historical reality disappears from the map in the viewer's mind. If you take out that word, you remove the context of military presence. You remove international law.
And suddenly it's just two groups fighting over land.
Instead of an occupier and an occupied population.
Yeah.
If you watch Al Jazeera's coverage of an event and then watch CNN or the BBC cover the exact same thing, the framing changes the entire moral equation.
This feels like the foundation for something much bigger. I mean, if you control the language, you can control the narrative of an entire war. The material I read points to the Iraq War as the masterclass in this kind of thing.
It is still the clearest case study of media-government coordination in modern history. We talk about it now like it was a mistake. Oh, the intelligence was bad.
Right, an intelligence failure.
But it wasn't just bad reporting. It was manufacturing consent. Major outlets didn't just report on weapons of mass destruction. They sold the idea. They marketed that war like a new product.
I went back and looked at the quotes. Vice President Dick Cheney back in 2002. There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now have weapons of mass destruction. We suspect, or it's likely, just no doubt.
And that line was echoed without any real skepticism by every major network. You had the New York Times running front-page stories citing anonymous sources who later turned out to be Iraqi exiles with, a very clear agenda.
Retired generals on every channel.
All with undisclosed ties to defense contractors unanimously supporting the invasion.
The statistical imbalance is what really floored me. There's a study by Fairness and Accuracy in reporting about 2 weeks right before the invasion.
And this is the smoking gun. They analyzed the guest lists of the major evening news broadcasts.
What did they find?
They found that the 64% of all sources were explicitly pro-war. Only 10% were anti-war voices.
10%.
If you look at sources actually affiliated with anti-war organizations, people who actually studied peace or conflict resolution, that number drops to 3%.
3%. That's not a debate. That is a monologue.
It was the illusion of a debate. They would argue about how to invade or when to invade.
But not if we should invade.
That question was effectively off the table, and the most revealing part is what happened afterwards. Ability?
None.
When no weapons were found, the narrative didn't collapse, it just pivoted. Suddenly, it was all about liberating the Iraqi people.
And the pundits who swore there were nukes.
Yeah.
The people who got it so wrong.
They're still on TV today, still writing columns. Zero professional repercussions. That's the lesson the system teaches. You can be catastrophically wrong as long as you're wrong in the same direction as the establishment.
It's not just the news, though, is it? It's the air we breathe.
No.
I'm a movie buff, so the section on Hollywood really stood out to me. There's this invincibility myth that Hollywood pushes, and I think it does just as much work as the 6 o'clock news.
Hollywood is arguably the most successful psychological operation in history. How is the U.S. military framed in almost every single movie?
As the good guys.
Oh.
As a defensive force.
Always a defensive force. Even when they're deployed 7,000 miles from home, they're defending an outpost or defending freedom. The word we should probably be using is occupation, guarding resources, or people who, frankly, don't want them there. But the movie framing makes that impossible to see.
I watched Top Gun Maverick recently. Great action, fun movie. But the plot... The U.S. has to bomb a uranium enrichment facility in some unnamed rogue nation.
And think about the questions the movie never, ever asks.
Okay.
Under what legal authority? Who decided this nation was rogue? What gives the U.S. the right to decide who gets that technology when they have the biggest arsenal in the world?
Those questions didn't even cross my mind while I was watching it. It's just, America acts, therefore it is justified.
The enemy is faceless, incompetent, and their only motivation is to be an obstacle. It's an Independence Day America leads the world. Red Dawn, Iron Man. These aren't just movies. After decades of this, it becomes the baseline for how you process reality.
You just assume the real world matches the movie script. Good guys versus bad guys. Which I guess brings us back to my colleague and the rusty shovels, because when reality conflicts with that script, people's brains just seem to short circuit.
This is where we see the cognitive dissonance most clearly, with Russia and Ukraine. Since the start of that war, the Western narrative was absolute. Sanctions will crush them. The economy is collapsing.
The ruble will be rubble. But the data says something completely different. I was looking at the IMF's October 2024 outlook. Russia's economy grew about 3.6%.
Which outpaced Germany, the UK, and Japan. But the public is told to expect a total collapse that just never arrives. So to bridge that gap between narrative and reality, the media has to rely on caricature.
The shovel story. I saw that everywhere.
Yeah.
Russian soldiers are literally fighting with shovels. Or my favorite, they're stealing washing machines to get the microchips.
And the GPS units from civilian cars. These stories went viral. CNN, Reddit, everywhere. It fed that Hollywood narrative, the enemy is stupid, primitive, and backward. Then, by late 2023, military analysts had to quietly admit the reality. Russia was producing more artillery shells than all of NATO combined. Their electronic warfare was highly effective.
And I never saw a retraction for the shovel stories.
No, the stories just vanish. The shovel-wielding barbarian is quietly replaced by ominous warnings of Russian military strength.
When you reduce your enemy to that caricature, the public stops asking for diplomacy. They just demand total victory, because how hard can it be to beat a guy with a shovel?
It keeps public support high without any real strategy. And speaking of caricatures, we have to talk about the ultimate information black hole. North Korea.
The starkest example there is. I realized, reading these notes, that I know basically nothing about North Korea. Everything I think I know comes from headlines that sound like, they're from a tabloid.
That's because they largely are. Most of those crazy North Korea stories come from one of two places. South Korean tabloids, which are basically their National Enquirer.
Or Radio Free Asia.
Which is funded by the U.S. government.
Let's run through some of the greatest hits. The haircut story.
Right. In 2014, outlets reported, everyone in North Korea must have the same haircut as Kim Jong-un. Then, just a few months later, the same outlets reported, it is now illegal to have the same haircut as Kim Jong-un.
So it was mandatory and illegal at the same time.
The goal isn't truth, it's to make them look ridiculous, or the unicorn lair.
I remember laughing at that one. North Korea discovers a unicorn lair.
A complete mistranslation. Archaeologists found a site associated with the Kirin, which is a mythological horse in Korean folklore. It's like finding a site linked to King Arthur and the press reporting, UK government claims they found a dragon.
And the execution stories.
Official executed by a pack of dogs, reported as fact by major networks. Then the official shows up, perfectly alive, at a conference a few weeks later.
But the correction never goes viral.
Never. The strategy is to make them seem so alien, so ridiculous, that you never have to seriously engage with their perspective or their history. You just dismiss them. It's dehumanization disguised as news.
And we're seeing a similar, though maybe more complex, shift happening with China now.
This is probably the most significant narrative shift of our lifetimes.
I realize my own opinion on China changed, but not because I did any research. It changed because the tone of the news changed.
The pivot was incredibly sharp, around 2018 to 2020. Before that, the story was,
they're copycats, they make cheap goods. Pollution.
Exactly, they make our plastic toys. And now, it's look at their advanced EVs, look at their modern cities, their AI is a threat. They went from incompetent to a peer competitor almost overnight in the media cycle.
But I want to zero in on the social credit narrative. We're taught to see it as this uniquely dystopian surveillance tool.
We view it as an episode of Black Mirror, right? But if you strip away the scary framing for a second and just look at the mechanics, you have to ask yourself, is it really that unique?
Or do we just have a different version of it?
We have credit scores.
Which dictate where you can live, what you can buy, if you can get a job or start a business. A low enough score and you were effectively out of the economy.
We have deplatforming. Private companies can remove you from the digital world. We have shadow banning. We have watch lists. In China, the system is centralized, and they call it social credit.
In the West, it's decentralized.
Privatized.
And we call it risk management or terms of service. Control over your participation in society. But because ours is distributed across banks and tech companies, we don't see a single bad guy, so we feel free.
And if you point out that China might have, say, safe cities or modern infrastructure, you're a bot. Or a paid shill. It's binary thinking. Either you agree it's an evil empire or you're a foreign agent. It shuts down all nuance.
Okay, but I can hear people listening to this and screaming, but we have a free press. We criticize Vietnam. We had Watergate.
And that's a fair point, but it requires a subtle distinction. The Western system encourages criticism, but only within very specific, acceptable boundaries. You can criticize how a war is being fought. You can say the strategy is wrong, or we need more troops. But questioning the fundamental right to wage that war in the first place, that's fringe.
You can expose an individual's corruption, like Nixon.
But not the structure that produces a Nixon. Watergate got rid of a president, and the media patted itself on the back. Journalism saved democracy. But did it dismantle the imperial presidency? Did it stop the surveillance state?
No.
No. The system remained. The press acts as a pressure release valve to save the system, not to change it.
So when people say Al Jazeera is biased or RT is propaganda,
They're absolutely right. Those outlets are biased. But the trap is pretending that CNN, the BBC, and the New York Times aren't. They're just better at disguising their bias. They wrap it in objectivity. A citizen in Moscow or Beijing often knows state TV is slanted, they're cynical about it, but the average Westerner believes they're getting just the facts, and they outsource their skepticism to fact-checkers who operate within the very same bubble.
So if our opinions aren't really ours, if they're products of this whole environment, we have to talk about how to break the spell.
Yeah.
What do you actually do with this realization?
Yeah. You have to diversify your sources, but I mean truly diversify. Reading the Washington Post and the New York Times is not diversity. That's an echo chamber.
So you mean reading Al Jazeera or...
Al Jazeera, the South China Morning Post, even the Tehran Times. Not because they're telling the truth.
Right, but because their bias is different.
You're looking for the truth in the gaps between the narratives. You have to triangulate reality.
You get back to primary sources.
Yes. If a headline says, so-and-so threatened the world, find the transcript. Read the actual speech. You will be shocked at how often the headline has no resemblance to what was actually said.
And following local journalists seems key.
Use platforms like X to follow reporters who are actually in the country they're reporting on. The parachute journalist who flies in for a week misses all the context. You need the people who live there.
And always, always apply the who benefits test.
Who gains from me believing this? Does this narrative justify a war? Does it justify a budget increase? If the answer is yes, you have to be doubly skeptical.
And the last one, which I think is the hardest, is monitoring our own emotions.
That's the biggest red flag. If a headline makes you instantly smug or instantly angry, you are being manipulated. That emotion is the hook. You have to step back and ask why it was framed to make you feel that way.
It's terrifying, but it's also kind of freeing. I've realized so many opinions I held about Russia, about China, about how the world works, they weren't really mine. They were just downloaded. And when the narrative changed, I changed right along with it.
The goal isn't to replace one set of propaganda with another. It's to recognize that we are all swimming in these narratives all the time.
The first step toward genuine understanding is acknowledging what we don't know and questioning what we think we do. Because if you can't identify the propaganda you've already internalized, you're not immune to manipulation. You're just an easier target.